Today we're talking about the pros and cons of using a wool ironing mat to do your ironing when you're quilting versus making a at-home DIY ironing pad. My name is Kit, and behind the camera is Conrad handling the lighting and the camera and the film editing. Today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of using a wool ironing mat versus making a similar type of portable ironing mat that you can use when you're crafting and quilting and that kind of thing. I've used both, and I ordered the wool mat thinking it would be great, and did use it for a time, but I did find some cons to the mat. I love the portability of it, being able to move it around and set it up near the sewing machine or the cutting table or wherever I'm working. But what I found was when I first started using it, I had it sitting on a stainless steel table and not realizing that using the steam in the iron and the cotton setting on the iron, which is a very high heat setting, that leaving it on that surface and walking away from it ended up causing the table to rust and to leave rust spots on the back of the mat. So that was one of the reasons. And the other thing, when I tried to use it here at my cutting table, and you can see from looking at this table, I like to have a cutting mat that pretty much fills up the space of the table, because then I have the flexibility to cut yardage as well as smaller pieces, and I don't have to worry about if I'm on a mat or if I need to go pull a mat into my workspace. So I like the idea of being able to pull this wool mat over and use it on the cutting table. However, I found that again the heat comes through the mat through the wool mat onto whatever cutting mat I have, and it would warp it. So I have one, it's out in the garage now. I have one in the garage that's warped because I use the wool mat. So because of that, I kind of went away from using the wool mat, and I even had purchased a smaller one. This one I think would be good by the sewing machine with maybe a smaller iron for just pressing seams when I'm piecing blocks. But beyond that, I don't think that, that the wool mat is really going to be my choice going forward. So what I had done, and I had Conrad help me pull the staples out of this morning, but what I had done was made my own mat. This mat was wrapped in fabric, and I'll show you what I had underneath it. And the only reason that I took this apart today is because I found that when I was heavily starching, because when I quilt, I like to saturate the fabric in starch and iron it so that it's firm and stable when I'm cutting and piecing. So I found that when I had a heavily starched piece of fabric and I laid it on this fabric, that some of the color and the ink from the fabric bled onto my fabric. I was using a white fabric at the time, and I noticed that it bled to it. So I want to continue to use this, but I want to get rid of the colored fabric. So I'm going to switch to a muslin just so I don't have to worry about color bleed when I'm ironing. So what I did, and I'll kind of deconstruct this to show you, what I did was I bought a TV tray table from Walmart. I looked this one up today. It's like $9.96 to buy. It's solid wood. It's very firm. The corners are rounded. It's something that I can staple into on the bottom side. And when I bought it, it had the legs on it that you could stand it on the floor as a TV tray. I thought when I first did it, I first put my cover on it, and I thought I would use it next to the sewing machine, but I found that I really didn't use it, and it was very low. You had to be sitting to really make it, feasible to use. So I took the bottom off of it and took the board that I had covered, and I used it on my board. Then it's still portable. It's just as portable as the wool mat, but I don't have to worry about the heat getting through the board and warping my mats. I don't have to worry about it getting moisture on the bottom and rusting a surface or molding or causing any of those issues. So when you say the verses, I like the idea of the wool mat. And again, I think in a small application with a small iron for just pressing seams when you're piecing a quilt, I think it's still a great option. But when it comes to your general crafting where you want a surface to iron on near your cutting, where you can cut and iron and kind of shift between those two activities, I like the idea of the DIY project kind of option with the board. So again, this is a TV tray from Walmart, $9.96 on the website today. I again took it, turned it upside down, and just took the legs, unscrewed the screws that had the legs attached to it, so that I had a board. Then, and again, this is the old one, so I'll show you kind of how this looks deconstructed. This is a piece of fabric that I cut that was cut like 2-3 inches bigger than the board. And then I used a thermal batting, and there are several kinds of this thermal batting on the market. One brand is Insulbright. Another one is a Pellon product that I used here, Pellon style 975, and these battings are meant to use for pot holders, things where you want to either keep heat or cold in, like little lunch bags, that kind of thing. So again, the Pellon was style 975. Today I cut out, I also had some Insulbright, which is the same thing. It's a batting with a metal type product inside to keep heat in or out, depending on what you're trying to do. So this is what I used today. So I had some of both of those. And so I used a layer or two of, I used a layer of the Insulbright. Then I used a couple of layers of batting, just because I wanted to have a soft surface on the board when I was ironing. So that's what I had on the old one. And again, this tended to bleed onto my white fabrics if I was doing something that was like a really wet starch. So I'm going to move from this option and show you how I'm going to put a new cover on this one. So we'll move this out of the way. Okay, so what I did before we started filming is I took a piece of muslin and I put 2 pieces of batting in there, cotton batting, and then a piece of Insulbright. So there's 4 layers total. And I cut those a couple of inches larger than the board that I'm working with. And again, this is a nice solid wood board. It's not going to bend or warp. I like that it's got rounded corners so you don't have any sharp edges. And I just eyeball this, kind of lay this on there. And let me stretch over here. So this is a just a stapler that my husband had in the garage. And I started out with pulling over the corners and stapling them into place. Now, my concern when I did this was I didn't want the staples to scratch my table or scratch my cutting mats. But with the extra layers and stapling this in there and allowing there to be a little bit of bulk on the corners, it pads it so that nothing causes an issue. So one corner gets stapled first, pull that, make that nice and tight. Let me move this out of the way so we're on the camera. Okay, so we pulled this over nice and tight, pull this so that it's nice and snug, and then do this one the same way. Get a nice good solid staple in it. Okay, and then do this corner. And again, I want to do this in a way that I can pull this back out and replace the cover if it gets stained or damaged, which it will over time with ironing, especially because a lot of what I iron is cotton, which means it's on the highest setting. Okay, so that gets me a nice firm stretched piece of fabric to start with. And again, this is just muslin that I've cut because I know that I want to be replacing that later. Okay, so I've got the corners In some cases I have cut away some of this bulk, but I think in this instance, because I want to keep that padding to keep the staples from scratching anything, I'm going to leave that there. And I'll just go around the whole thing and staple this thing down. And then once I've gotten around the whole thing, I have got a pad that will work, that I can move around. If it's in the way on my cutting table, I can move it away from the table and bring it back when I need it. I can move it over and set it next to the sewing machine. Oop, that one didn't quite get in there. Okay, and I'll add some more staples in there just to make sure everything stays. And again, it doesn't have to be beautiful. This is something that's very utilitarian. I'm going to move it in and out of my workspace as I'm working. The surface of it is probably going to get a little bit stained over time, so I'm not worried about it being glamorous. Okay, so I will come back and add some more staples, but as you can see, now we have a pad that I can iron on. I can move it in and out of the space. It's padded on the bottom because of all the batting, so nothing is going to scratch or rub my surface. So you can see that we have created a pretty simple project using a staple gun and some batting and some fabric that I had in my stash. We've looked at the wool mat and the advantages and disadvantages. Again, I like the idea of the wool mat, but I think that the DIY project is probably a little more appropriate for what I do, because again, I'm cutting at my cutting table and ironing as I go. I'm starching a lot of times, and then a lot of times I'm moving over to the sewing machine and piecing, and I want to be able to iron seam allowances as I'm piecing without having to get up and move around. And this works really well for those purposes. Now, so the next thing that we'll talk about, and I'm going to turn the camera off and move the camera over to show you a large ironing board that my husband and I put together for the purpose of ironing yardage, because I like to saturate my fabric in starch and iron it really well before I start cutting it up for piecing. So this board is attached to a 4-foot by 2-foot table, and I'll also show you how we used some PVC pipe to make the legs taller so that it was a similar height to the cutting table, so that I wasn't hunching over, and I'll show you what we did with that. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Okay, we've moved the camera so that we could show the larger ironing board that we had also DIY'd here at home. I was looking for an ironing surface that was bigger than the typical ironing board for, like I said before, ironing yardage. I like to heavily starch my fabric before I start quilting with it. So we use this to spread out yardage and iron it, as well as when I'm working on quilts that I need to press before I put them on the long arm. This table works for that. And then we use it for all sorts of other, we do t-shirts and that kind of thing, and we'll lay things on it. But the good thing about this table is it's something that we can take apart and store in the laundry room, lean it against a wall, get it out of the way. But then when we need it, we have the larger surface. So in this case, I did this one a little differently than I did the smaller one. I actually went to Joann's and purchased some padded ironing board cover fabric, and we covered a piece of plywood with the ironing board fabric. So, and there's many options. Even for the smaller one, I could have used this type of fabric to cover that. But I like a slightly softer padding on that ironing when I'm doing pieces. So I use this on this one because it's a firmer surface. So this is another option. Joann's Fabric sells it. I think if you Google ironing board cover fabric, it comes up as quilted ironing board fabric. So what we did was we started with a 24 by 48 inch plain folding table, which you can see under here. Then we went to Home Depot and purchased a piece of plywood that is 6 inches wider and 6 inches longer than the 24 by 48 table, because we needed a way to make this top sit on the table without sliding on the table or moving around when I was trying to iron. So the way that we solved that was to take 2 by 2 pieces of board, and my husband did this part of it, and we measured in so that it's 3 inches, so that we made this board, this piece of plywood, 6 inches longer, 6 inches wider, and then these cleats are 3 inches in on each side, which makes the space between the cleats exactly 24 by 48, so it sits right over the edge of the plastic table, the folding table, so that this doesn't move or slide when I'm using it. And in doing this one, I had done some YouTubing when I was trying to put this one together, and someone had recommended using aluminum foil over the board and then adding the padding on top of that. And I may have even done a layer of batting underneath the quilted padding. So it's the quilted padding, a layer of batting, and a layer of aluminum foil on top of the wood. And then once all of that is done, we attached these 2 by 2 boards, again exactly 48 inches by 24 inches in between the boards so that they exactly fit over. This is an insert to clarify the steps that I talked about related to putting the cover on this board, as well as the board, the 2 by 2 cleats that we use to secure it to the table so that it won't slide around. When you're doing this, you're going to want to first attach these 2 by 2 boards, and we did that by screwing them from the top of the plywood, from back here through the plywood and into this. That way there's no screws, you can't see any nails or screws from the bottom side, because they're screwed through the top, from the top of the table through. So we did that first, again measuring very carefully that we're exactly 48 inches between the cleats, between here exactly 24, so it would fit over the table well, snugly. Then once that was all done, then we set about attaching the cover to the top of the ironing board. And again, I can take this off, set it up against the wall in the laundry room, or store it away in a closet, and it's out of the way when I don't need it. The other thing that we were trying to solve when we were making this was that I wanted the ironing board to be, let me take this off out of the way. I wanted the ironing board to be taller than what the folding table was when we first purchased it. Because this, and it's grungy because it's been in the closet, but the folding table was shorter, and it was too short for ironing because I'm rather tall and I didn't want to be hunched over the shorter board. So we went to, again at Home Depot, and we purchased some PVC pipe, and my husband cut it off. You kind of have to look at the construction of your table, because this pipe comes up and rests on the brackets under the table. So we measured how tall we wanted the table to be and how far up it was going to come against these bolts, and that's how we decided how tall to do the PVC pipes. And again, I pull those PVC pipes off, fold the table up, put it in a closet, and those pipes get stuck up on a shelf when I'm not using it. In this case, you might notice that there is, my husband added the little caps on the end and screwed them on. That was just, so it would slide on the floor and move it. I move it around and move it out of the way whenever I'm not using it. So that was the way that we solved the need for a larger flat surface for yardage and quilting and ironing larger pieces. And then the smaller piece that we worked on a little earlier is what we use for ironing smaller pieces and when I'm doing quilting tops and that kind of thing. So I hope all this information is helpful to you. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate you supporting our channel when you do that. We've really enjoyed putting together these videos and providing help. I'm hoping that there are people out there that are maybe new to quilting and looking for the materials that they need to begin this kind of hobby, passion. I don't know, there's a lot of ways to describe. Quilting just feels like it's in my blood. I don't know if I could call it a hobby at this point. Plus I do the long arming for customers. So it's a business for me now, but it's something that I'm passionate about and I love to do. So it doesn't feel like work sometimes. So give it a thumbs up, like the video. Thank you for your time, and I hope this helped.